Eric, let's pull up Dr. Peter Mohler, who is coming up. We're pleased today to have Dr. Peter Mohler join us. He is the Chief Scientific Officer for the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center and Vice Dean for Research at the OSU College of Medicine. Dr. Mohler has been working with our team for the past few months to help us on our testing strategy. We're grateful for his work and expertise. We're grateful for him being here today. Doctor, thank you for joining us. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about the different tests, because I know that what happened with me yesterday has caused some questions, and people are asking about it. My understanding is that I was given up in Cleveland at Case an Anagen test. Later on at Ohio State, I was given a PCR test. And I wonder if you can maybe start off and just kind of explain what those differences are and anything you think that we should know.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, thanks, Governor, for having me on today. And certainly science is complex and testing is equally as complex. And so I'm going to break these into two different categories of testing and equate them to a high-power telescope and a pair of binoculars. And so I'm going to first focus on the high-power telescope. So when we think about the testing that we've typically been doing across Ohio, we call that PCR testing. And this is an incredibly sensitive and incredibly accurate, it's like a big telescope way to look at the virus. It actually looks at the genetic makeup of the virus, looking at the RNA, and amplifies it. So even a very small, minuscule bit of the virus can be amplified. And because of that, it can be very sensitive. The advantages obviously are we can detect very low viral loads in people that may be either symptomatic or asymptomatic. And we have the ability to be able to look at this over time. The disadvantages obviously are things like, it's hard to scale this. It's hard to have lots of different high-powered telescopes across the country, across the state. It takes a certain type of person to be able to run them that has had training. But when we get a result from the PCR test, similar to looking at a star with a high-powered telescope, you get a very good impression of what's happening at that level. Now, I'm going to contrast that in a second with the Anagen test, the test that you had yesterday. So very similar to a pair of binoculars, you're able to look maybe not at the level that you would look at with the PCR test. So the Anagen test, and that doesn't look at the genetic material, it actually looks at the protein on the surface of the virus. So it's a little bit less sensitive. And so you're going to have things that we call false negatives and false positives. Like binoculars, you're going to miss some stars. But the good part is you're going to be able to have lots of these across the field. And the key point of what we call point of care testing, which these enable, is that you can find out results within 15 or 20 minutes. And so for the epidemiologists of the world, you're very quickly able to do contact tracing, be able to quarantine people, and be able to make decisions on healthcare. With all of these tests, though, it's important that we understand their strengths and limitations. And so in the case of antigen testing, which is a newer type of testing to the state, we want to make sure that before we would roll this out for our state labs, we would understand really the benefits of doing it and also some of the disadvantages. So in the state, we've done almost 1.6 million tests using the PCR test. So we know really a lot about it. We're very familiar with the strengths and weaknesses. With the antigen test, it's still a new technology. We're getting to learn on it. We've been empowered by your team to be able to really study it, to figure out how it's going to work best for the citizens of Ohio and how to implement it as part of our strategy.
Well, thank you very much. Are there other quick things that you might call a quick test that are a PCR test?
Right. So we've often heard and
I'm excuse me. I guess the question, I think the assumption might be that every quick test is the same, and so maybe if you could just kind of explain that to us a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question, Governor. So there's two types of quick tests, and these are tests that can be done sort of in 15 or 20 minutes. The first that I just mentioned is this antigen test, and basically it's a swab of your throat or your nose, and gets put in this machine and says yes or no. The other way, though, is we've heard that a lot about these Abbott point of care tests. So this is still a molecular test like the PCR test, detecting the RNA or the DNA of the virus. And this is often done, like right now in the emergency departments, as a way to really triage cases. It's still a very accurate test, but not quite as accurate as what we would do in a CLIA lab, like we're doing here at the Wexner Medical Center with Patel.
So if you had to rank those, then rank them in the order of the most accurate.
Yes, sir. So we would call the gold standard to be the PCR test. And this would be the test that was done twice on you last evening. And again, this is going to be the one that gets at the very detailed look at the DNA or the RNA. So the big.
And doctor, let me interrupt. That's the test that for virtually everybody who's watching this who has had a test in Ohio, they probably have had a PCR test. Is
yes,
that right?
So the vast majority, well over 90% of the people that have been tested in Ohio have used the PCR giant telescope tester. And this again, gold standard. And I would say even beyond that, it's the best and most accurate test right now in the world.
Okay, I interrupted you. You started that test, gold standard. Then what would be next as far as accuracy?
Right. So you would probably put next your point of care Abbott ID type of test that you would get tested in the emergency room. Still quite accurate, a little bit faster. In fact, quite a bit faster than the PCR test that takes sometimes hours, and we've seen some backlogs of days. And then next to that, Governor, below that would be some of these things with like the antigen test that you took yesterday morning. So again, very fast, pretty accurate, but again, not quite as accurate as the PCR test that you took last night.
Now, we've been talking, Doctor, with a company that is been doing more than talking. We've entered a contract with them, a company that uses saliva. It's a California company. The saliva can be administered. The advantage it has is a number of people. It's self-administered for people who can do that, and you could do it in a group, and people would do it, and then it gets mailed to California and comes back. What kind of test is that, if you know?
Yes, sir. So specimen collection, and this would be whether it's saliva or a nasal swab, is really irrelevant in terms of what test it uses. But typically, what we're doing in Ohio is PCR based. Again, this very, very accurate test that gets at the very small pieces of DNA and RNA. The other thing, Governor, that if you don't mind me mentioning, is that we're beginning to start pilot processes to be able to do what's called pool testing. And so this process of being able to look at samples together, because the technology has advanced in a way that we can measure very sensitive amounts of DNA or RNA, we may be able to put 5, 10, or even 15 samples together. And the benefit of that, we've heard a lot about issues with supply chain. We've seen a lot of issues with turnaround times. This will allow us to save reagents, to speed up our turnaround times, and really to be able to change the way we test as a state and really redefine our testing strategy, which is exciting.
Well, it is exciting. And Doctor, I first found out about this when I was on a call with the Vice President, probably 3-4 weeks ago, and they talked about pool testing. I know what they're talking about. Then I found out, talked with you. And so if anyone's not familiar with the pool testing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Doctor, but you could let's say you took 4 people or 5 people, you put them in, you put them all together, you tested them. If it comes out negative, you've cleared 5 people. Now, if it comes up positive, then you got to go back and take that samples that you already have and do that testing. But in a state like Ohio, where we're now running about 5.5 or 5.6, something like that, percent positivity, it probably makes a lot of sense. If you're out there certainly with people who don't have symptoms, it would make a lot of sense to do that, I would think.
Yes, sir. And in fact, if you're looking at asymptomatics, where right now, if you think about a prevalence of less than 2% or even 1%, it might even allow you to save about 80% of your testing capacity, expanding 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. So it's really it's something that's going to be a game changer. And then the really great part is a lot of that innovation that has pushed that is happening right here in Ohio. And whether it's creation of new protocols to be able to do this, partnerships with companies to be able to allow us to move forward, or even relationships that you and the Lieutenant Governor have set us up with the CDC and the FDA, as well as the White House, have allowed us to really get out in front of this as a state.
Well, Doctor, thanks for everything you've done. Thanks for coming in today. We may need you for some questions that I can't answer, but we appreciate it. Thanks for what you do every day for Ohio.
Thank you. And I just like to thank all the people in the labs that are doing these tests every day.
It's a huge effort, and they're working very hard, and they're working hard all over the state. So we're very grateful for that. Thanks, Doctor.